Ever since I announced that we were going to be starting a humanist-based service at All Souls, I've been inundated with questions. What is humanism? Why would a church promote humanism? Why would a humanist come to church? Is there a difference between humanism and atheism? And why can't we all just worship together? So I thought on this first Sunday of this new service, I would take the opportunity to try to answer these questions. And since the theme of this month of September is vocation or calling, it ties in perfectly because the point of this new service is directly connected to this church's vocation. And it has everything to do with what this church is called to be. First of all, everyone who attends All Souls at whichever service is looking for a religion which will not be an embarrassment to their sanity, or an insult to their intelligence. A church that does not deny the significance of science and the right and responsible role of reason in religion. It is a church that does not see doubt and skepticism as a fatal flaw, but as a great gift. In fact, it is a religion that sees blind faith as a failing and sees questioning and critique as essential tools for the discovery of truth. But it's not just about not checking your brain at the door. It's also about not checking your integrity at the door. I met a man just a couple of weeks ago who told me that he attends a Catholic church. He went on to say that he believes in a woman's right to choose. He supports gay marriage. He thinks that women should be able to be religious leaders equal to men. And he does not believe the words of the Apostles' Creed that they recite at the beginning of Mass every week. And yet for him, for many reasons, he remains a practicing Catholic. And that works okay for him. And even though it's not my way or my choice, I can honor and respect his choice. But All Souls is a church for people who do not want to repeat creeds they don't believe, or for people who don't want to support institutions that don't further their values regarding human rights and freedom. That's certainly not to say that everyone at All Souls agrees on all of the same political or social issues. It is simply to say that at All Souls, you are not asked to say one thing when you believe another. I've noticed over the past 12 years that there are a number of young couples who come to me to be married saying things like, "We don't want a very religious ceremony." Now, I understand what they mean. They want it to be here. They want one of our ministers to officiate. They usually even prefer that we wear our robe. But they don't want the service to be too churchy. For these couples, they don't want this very special day to include aspects of religion that have no meaning to them. I performed a wedding for a couple. One of them had grown up here at All Souls. The other one had grown up in a secular Jewish family. And they explained that religiously they were atheists. But they had a small silver Kiddush cup with ornate designs on it that had been used and passed down by the Jewish side of their family for a couple of centuries. It had been used for Friday night Shabbat services and weddings and other important rituals on at least 2 continents by many generations. They asked if we could incorporate a wine ceremony using that cup into the wedding. Now, I'll tell you something. It was one of the most powerful ritual moments I've ever experienced in a wedding, and an atheist wedding, no less. For this couple, this ritual with a cup was not about obedience to God's commandments or even about a relationship to anything that they would call God. For them, it was imbued with deep significance because of the hands and the lives of those who had also held that cup at important moments in their life. It connected them to all of those other couples and all of those other moments across time and space. The reason the ritual had power was because it had deep meaning that they could understand and that mattered to them. If the wedding had been a Hollywood movie, I think they would have used time-lapse photography to show the scene of all the different hands of different ages and different times holding the cup, passing on the cup between one another in different settings, all the way up until this young couple on their wedding day. All Souls is a church that makes room for people to come together and mark important moments in our lives in ways that have real meaning. When a child is born, when a child comes of age, and when a person comes to die. But in all of these moments, we want to fill them not just with rituals and religious words for the sake of tradition or circumstance. We want to fill them with significance that resonates with what seems real and true. And let's be honest, there are many, many people who find their values and principles and inspiration for living outside of religious scriptures and traditional religious language. They draw their values from the natural world, from science, from philosophy, from learning history and reading poetry, from the arts, and from being in community. Let me be clear about this. Anyone who equates not believing in God with being immoral or uncaring or not believing in anything is just admitting the poverty of their own understanding. Because there are many people who do not believe in God, certainly not in any traditional sense of God, who have strong moral convictions and who live deeply meaningful and compassionate lives. And I want those people in this church. And we already have a lot of them. Maybe you're one of them. I want everyone who agrees with the mission and vision of All Souls, and everyone who wants to be a part of our wonderful classes and great programs and activities to feel welcome and to feel inspired by the worship here when we gather together on Sunday mornings. And I care much more about how someone acts than what someone believes or doesn't believe. Someone might say, why offer a humanist service and not 18 other different kinds of services? The reason is simple. Humanism has been and continues to be a major influence of Unitarian and Universalist churches throughout the ages. If you heard my sermon on lineage about a year ago, you'll remember that this church sits in a long tradition that is like a deep river with three primary tributaries that make up its heritage. They are, of course, Christianity, with strong early Christian and Jewish roots. Transcendentalism, which people like Emerson and Thoreau and Margaret Fuller, among others, gave to us. And humanism, which has its roots in science and philosophy and was brought into our faith by famous Unitarians like Charles Darwin and John Dietrich and others. Let me say something about the roots of Western humanism. But as I share this part of European history, I want to make a nod to the fact that there are rich humanist roots in other cultures and other countries that predate European humanism by hundreds of years. There's the Lokayata movement, which thrived in India around 1000 before the Common Era, which criticized the Hindu religion of the day and developed a naturalistic theology of the cosmos. 400 years later, in the 6th century before the Common Era, the Charvaka school of thought in India maintained that there are no gods, that there is no immortal soul, and promoted a moral philosophy centered on human welfare. Also, Chinese philosophers in the 6th century before the Common Era are notable for their humanistic, ethical philosophies and their skepticism about the supernatural. The great Taoist teacher Lao Tse, for example, once said, "If lightning is the anger of the gods are concerned mostly with trees." Then there is Confucius from China, who tried to replace traditional religious beliefs with an ethical system focused on responsibility to family and society. Confucius's godless philosophy, which predates Christianity by 600 years, included the tenet, "Do not do to others what you would not like for yourself." Over time, I look forward to exploring some of these different roots of humanism that come from different cultures. But most directly influential to the development of Unitarianism in the West began 500 years before Christianity with Greece, when they were having what's called their golden era. That relatively small civilization was inquisitive and skeptical and left a legacy that still impacts us today and can be seen in every field, from art, architecture, and education to science, government, law, philosophy, and medicine. One of their foundations was critical, independent thinking. They also cared about what was natural and real. The Greek humanists gave us realism, the idea that our beliefs must be based in what is real, in the facts, in evidence. And this was the basis of much of modern science. These Greeks also gave us freedom and democracy. In Attica, every farmer, artist, and storekeeper had a say, at least the males. They weren't that evolved. Greek philosophy firmly opposed war and slavery, and then ensured that no Greek citizen would starve. So they are also known for compassion. The roots of Greek humanism gave the Western world an emphasis on critical thinking over blind trust in tradition, realism, which involves trusting evidence over superstition, freedom, democracy, and compassion. Who knows what would have happened in Western society if the Greek civilization had lasted another 1,000 years? But it didn't. When ancient Rome fell, so did the Greek way of thinking. The Western world fell into the Dark Ages, trumpeted by the moral and intellectual failures of the church, which brought on theological hatreds, inquisitions, expansion of slavery, and the Crusades. This period of religious backwardness and violence lasted 1,000 years, until the Renaissance of the 15th century, when humanist values began to come back into human awareness. With it came the reawakening of science and philosophy and democracy and ideas of human dignity and human rights. From this came the protests against the popes and the bishops that spawned the Protestant Reformation. This church here in Tulsa is a direct descendant of this period in Europe. In fact, in 2 weeks, I'll be traveling to our partner church in Europe in the town of Enlaka in the Carpathian Mountains. That church and that entire village has been Unitarian since 1568. Now, to this day, our churches in that part of the world, the original churches of this tradition, remain Bible-based Christian Unitarian with strong rational influence dating back to the Enlightenment in Europe. Here in America, Unitarians and Universalists maintain our roots in that era of strongly protesting Christians who were and are not willing to give the heritage of the Bible and the moral example of Jesus over to conservative theological proponents who've turned Christianity into a religion of empire and exclusiveness and domination. As one of my predecessors in this pulpit once said, Suzanne Meyer, we have a calling to rescue Christianity from the Christians. We also retain and lift up the proud roots in humanism from the Enlightenment and to this day. And here in America, we also weave in the tradition of Transcendentalism that came out of the ferment of the Unitarian churches in New England in the 19th century. The Transcendentalists were inspired by religions beyond Christianity and Judaism. They brought into our churches teachings and ideas from Buddhism and other traditions from the Far East. They were among those who began to see Native American religion not as something to supersede and suppress, but as something to study and appreciate. They came to look at nature with reverence and introduced a mystical and deeply spiritual element into this tradition. Many Unitarian Universalists across America or their churches, Unitarian Universalist churches, tend to emphasize one of these strands of our heritage above the others. So you'll see if you travel around, if you've been to different churches throughout the country, you'll see Christian Unitarian Universalist churches, places like King's Chapel in Boston and in a number of other places, particularly in New England. But we can also see many churches that are humanist in orientation, so have services more like this service that don't ever mention God, don't ever bring up the Bible, except maybe once a year on Christmas, and then they apologize profusely as they do that. So we also have many of our churches tend to be really what could be called Transcendentalist inspired services that bring in the value from the world's religions and cultures, weave in a little bit of humanism and certainly a little bit of Christianity as one of the important religions of the world, and that tends to be what a lot of our churches do. But here at All Souls, we strive to weave in all of the strands of this tradition into our religious life and our church's life. And with the creation of this new service, we have an exciting opportunity. Each service will include some references. Each of these three services, of course, will include references to some of the other ideas and principles being held up, but the message in each service will be based in the same value and the same subject throughout the day on Sundays here. The same point, if you will be made. But instead of trying to give each of these theological strands full and equal time in each service, which means either none of them have enough time to be fully explored, or one of the three ends up getting more emphasis than the others, with three services, we'll be able to look at the theme of the month and the subject of each sermon with more depth from the perspectives of humanism, transcendentalism, and the Bible. So here's what I mean. Next week, my subject is making difficult decisions. Right? And I'll be talking about really hard, sometimes heart-wrenching and life-changing decisions that we all face at different moments in our lives. So at 8:30 in this service, I'll be talking about how we make such decisions, but without reference to God or the Bible or traditional religion. At 10, at our service at 10, our traditional service, I'll be sure to draw on examples that come from the religions and cultures of the world, which may or may not include the Bible on any given week. And at 11:30, we'll include much of what the other services include, references to the humanistic and the world religions, but we'll also be intentional about looking at what the Bible has to teach us about, in this case, making really difficult decisions next week. So what's become so apparent to me in the years that I've been here, just over 12 years now, is how different people orient their lives around different perspectives. And the bottom line is that everyone who comes to this church knows that our religion is not in here 1 hour a week, but our religion is how we live our lives every moment out in the world. We come into the service to be inspired, to be challenged, to be comforted, to learn and to grow. And then we leave the sanctuary, and that's where we live our faith. That's where we live our religion. That's what really makes a difference. Some people are inspired more by nature, and others by Buddha, and others by the Bible. Some people are comforted by quiet contemplation, and others by clapping and snapping and hugging each other in church. Some people can't stand the fact that people stand up in our 11:30 service shaking hands and giving each other hugs and clapping, and it's just the last thing that they're interested in. And yet for the folks who go there, that is a deeply enriching and inspiring service, and they come back for more. And so we have quite a range, and we want to make room for all those who want to be a part of All Souls to feel welcome here and to know that they are truly, that they truly belong. We're attempting to create, in some sense, we're attempting to create the most inclusive community that's possible within the circle of shared values and integrity and purpose and commitment to the common good. Why do we want to do that? Because throughout the course of religions and philosophies, throughout time and throughout the world, there has always been a notion, or often been a notion, that the human family is truly one and waiting to be united. And yet the human family has consistently been divided by region, race, religion, and ridiculousness. The family of humankind has been divided by color and class, creed and culture for far too long. And we have seen a gap between the people of different generations, political persuasions, and sexual orientations. And here at All Souls, we have a calling. We have a calling as a living body of people who throughout history have held on to the possibility that the human family can be bound together into a greater whole. As a church, we are called, as our centennial vision states, which is hanging beautifully out in the hallway, to radiate a sense of welcome, love, and inclusiveness. And we hope to become an embodiment of the world we dream about, the world we hope will someday be outside of these walls, throughout the land and throughout the world. A world that is defined by human understanding and a celebration of life's great diversity. It is something that has long been inspired, has long been an aspiration of humanity, but has never been achieved. For those of you who are new to All Souls, I hope that you'll join us on this expansive journey. Ours is truly a deep river with many tributaries. It is like a silver wine goblet that has been passed down from ancestors in many lands, that is now in our possession, in our hands. It has power because it has meaning, and it binds us to the past even as it propels us into the future. Welcome home. I'm glad you're here.